So I'm very bullish about the fact that the Times Higher Education rankings are already the most balanced and most comprehensive of the ranking systems. The other rankings that are known globally use 6 indicators. We use 13 separate performance indicators, and in this business, size matters. And we cover the full range of a university's activities. We do look at the teaching environment, we look at research, of course, we look at international outlook. And we are unique among the rankings in looking to capture knowledge transfer, universities' impact on business and the economy. But the main indicator in the rankings, quite rightly, looks at scholarly impact. I think it's correct that we do that. We look at citations to research papers where examining how much universities are contributing to new knowledge in its purest form, whether it's in philosophy, classics, natural sciences, or nuclear physics. But when we developed the Times Higher Education World University Rankings with Thomson Reuters back in 2009 and 2010, we did think it was really important to capture real-world impact. And impact's a little bit of a dirty word in the UK. There's a drive by government to encourage scholars to start predicting the outcomes of their work, to apply their research to more clear short-term goals. And it has been very controversial, but there's no getting away from the fact that it is an essential part of what universities do today, especially in an environment of accountability where taxpayers' money is hard to come by and you need to demonstrate your impact on the world that you're in. So we did create an innovation indicator for the rankings. There is an indicator of knowledge transfer, but it is very simple and it is pretty crude. We do capture how much income an institution attracts from industry, and we scale that for the size of the institution. So we have made a serious attempt. We have made the first attempt to capture a university's third mission in rankings, but we recognize it's too simple. We'd like to go further. We'd like to do better, and we want more new, sophisticated metrics to measure this activity. So I think this session, to me, is extremely exciting. I think not only will it help enhance the comprehensive picture of global higher education that Thomson Reuters and Times Higher Education have already created, it is highly likely to give us entirely new ranking indicators. And actually, for me, it might well develop into an entirely new ranking system, a Times Higher Education innovation and impact ranking. It's my hope. So I think we could, so it sounds cheesy, but we are potentially making history here in terms of the ranking landscape, accepting that there's no single model of excellence, that we need to capture different aspects of a university's performance against different missions. So I'm absolutely delighted that we have a really high quality panel here, an incredibly diverse group of experts. So I'm eagerly anticipating what they have to say, and importantly what you have to say as well. This is a consultation. We really want to hear from you, so we are going to leave time for questions at the end, and we'll obviously continue these questions at the drinks tonight and for weeks and months to come. It's the start of a conversation. So we do have an incredible panel. Janet Beer is the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford Brookes University. We have Alvaro Crosta, who's the Vice-Rector of the University of Campinas in Brazil. Professor Sahul Hamid bin Abu Bakar is the Vice-Chancellor of the University Technology Mara in Malaysia. Gerard de Graaff is the Director of the European Commission's Directorate General for Communications Networks, Content and Technology, DG Connect. I'm very excited that we have him here today because I think it's a very important part of DG Connect's agenda to try and capture these sorts of metrics. We have Aaron Sharma, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Commercialisation at Queensland University of Technology in Australia. And we have Professor Ehio Su, who's actually the Chair of the University Evaluation and Management Committee at the Pahang University of Science and Technology. So a fantastic, diverse panel. Each panelist will be making some formal remarks, quite tight to try and make sure we allow you time to join in the debate. We want to keep this informal. But before we start, I think we want somebody to set the scene. And I'm delighted here we have Joshua Schnell from Thomson Reuters. Joshua is the Director of Scientific Analytics at Thomson Reuters Scientific and Scholarly Research Division. And I think it's really important that we actually set out what data already exists and what Thomson Reuters can already do and then work out how we can fill the gaps, what other information we need, and how we get a really comprehensive picture of a university's economic and societal impact. So I'm delighted to hand over to Josh to set the scene before we go to the panelists. Thank you, Josh.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Phil, for the introduction. And I wanted to thank Times Higher Education and Plymouth University and the other organizers of the summit for inviting us to participate in this very important session this afternoon, talking about research impact, innovation, and some possible new indicators. As you know, Thomson Reuters is the data provider for the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. And as such, we've been in ongoing discussions about ways to broaden those indicators to reflect the broader mission of the universities. A lot of what we've been talking about here today, entrepreneurship, innovation. And I want to reiterate that this is, in our view, the start of an important conversation with you and with the community to look at those potential indicators and to work together to decide on a direction. Very much like in this picture on the title of my slides here, we have a lot of different directions that we can head down, like these two people, and we're looking to work with you and the community to choose the best directions to move forward. So we think about these indicators in terms of the university's mission, and this is just a few examples, very generic examples of the university mission. Of course, education and training of students, as well as rigorous scholarship and research or knowledge generation, have been traditional mission areas of the universities. But more and more, we're seeing the importance of transferring that knowledge to other spheres through translation and commercialization, really reflecting dissemination of that knowledge to other areas. And what's also very important, and we've heard about it today, is that universities have a mission to engage their community through activities and service to really have an impact in that local area. And so when we think about these indicators and when we work on these indicators, we have to keep these mission areas in mind. Now, I have one example of an interesting case of technology transfer that was a huge success when I was in research administration at Northwestern University. A chemistry professor there, Professor Richard Silverman, worked for many years on a molecular compound that, through a partnership with pharmaceutical industry, was found to be a very strong anticonvulsive agent. Well, of course, the university licensed that compound, and it eventually became the billion-dollar blockbuster drug Lyrica. It made quite a bit of money for the university, but really underlies the importance of universities to partner with industry to take that knowledge and research scholarship and transfer it and to have that broad impact. Now, an interesting aspect to this is that when Professor Silverman was interviewed by university staff later, he was asked if he knew how effective the compound would be. And he said, no, we really didn't know how effective it was going to be. It wasn't until we partnered with the pharmaceutical industry to start those tests. And he said, we just do basic research. And so universities have this really challenging translation. And I think for us to develop indicators, to think about indicators, that type of understanding of how the different products of the university will transfer is really key to keep in mind. So Phil mentioned that Thomson Reuters and various activities that we've been doing, data sets and projects, has been working to develop some indicators that could be used to rank universities by innovation and impact. And so what I'd like to do today is go through a few of those. They are by no means comprehensive, but they're things that I want to include in the discussion and for you to think about as we work together as a community to develop these possible indicators. So in the mission area of education and training of students, of course, what we'd like to be able to do is understand how universities are producing a skilled workforce that moves into roles in industry and in government and is having an impact in those local economies. And of course, we look at undergraduate level and then also graduate and in the research staff levels. In the mission area of rigorous scholarship and research, of course, we already use things like journal articles, books, data sets, patents, to look at the output and impact of research activities. And those can also be used to think about innovation. Collaborations with industry, whether they're research collaborations or other kinds of collaborations, licensing materials, those are important areas to track. But areas that are also very important and can be quite challenging is how do we understand how knowledge is transferred into practice, whether that's through new methods for surgery, for example, or the development of manufacturing or industry standards based on university activities. One area that I work in is in looking at basic research that has been taken up into more applied areas. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Again, returning to this idea I mentioned earlier about the success that Northwestern had with Lyrica, universities need to look at and understand how they're partnering with industry and other organizations through research collaborations, by licensing materials, but also through activities such as faculty consulting, setting up incubators at the university, or working, we heard about earlier today about efforts to establish spin-offs and really bolster that entrepreneurial spirit within students and faculty. One of the other mission areas that economic impact in terms of local, regional, and national systems is a very challenging one that I think we want to talk about today as well. Now, in one dimension, a university can be looked at as a consumer while it's carrying out R&D activities. We can track that through things like R&D expenditures. But on the flip side, what's also important to measure is how what the university produces, either as knowledge, intellectual property, or products, is actually consumed and used by the community and the marketplace. And of course, we can look at and understand how research and scholarly activities spill over into local industries. So again, these are just some of the possible indicators. I think we're going to hear more from our panelists. But they're things that we want to start exploring with you and understanding how we can leverage those in rankings and in other assessment of the mission around innovation and impact. Now, before I turn over to our first panelist, I want to put a few other considerations in your mind as we're thinking about these indicators. So first and foremost is the importance of good data coverage and data quality. And how do we get our hands on these data that will serve as the basis for our indicators and rankings? Well, of course, many of the data that we talk about exist in large-scale databases today. You're probably familiar with those. And then also, for example, with the World University Rankings, we have survey methodologies where we can collect data directly from institutions. We should also consider partnership models with organizations that are in those localized environments where we want to measure impact. Those can be regional and state governments or other nonprofits. Now, the group that I work with in Thomson Reuters has done some interesting work trying to leverage different data sets to link research projects to late-stage impacts such as drug development. So in this particular case study, we took a database that describes new drug applications in the US. And we were able to mine the data to identify patents that were protected by those new drug applications, and then look through the acknowledgement of government support to link those patents to projects funded by the government and carried out at universities. So here's one example where, using different data sets, we can leverage technology to link from university research to the development of a new drug. Now, of course, this is a fairly challenging situation to develop, and research takes time, and there's a lot of different routes. And so using citation data, patent-to-patent citations, patent-to-research publication citations, we can actually expand the potential for a university to track the impact it's having, again, in this case, in the development of a drug. So I put these out there as examples of how we could think about using technology to expand the data that underlies the indicators for innovation and impact. So as I wrap up, I want to introduce a few other considerations for the discussion. In addition to the challenges around data quality and coverage, we also want to think about the importance of timelines here. Some of the potential impacts can take years, if not decades, to be realized. And so we need to think about how to create indicators that are relevant, that are timely, but then also take into account those long timelines. The third point here is also later stage impacts are part of very complex systems with many actors. And so being able to, in a transparent way, in a reliable way, attribute those to the universities and to the other organizations that we're ranking is a key consideration for us. And finally, we want to make sure that the indicators that we're developing are valuable to the stakeholders, the leaders of the universities like yourselves, to the public stakeholders, and the governments that are just to name a few of the stakeholders. So again, we really see this as an opportunity to hear from you and to get input on what is critical as we begin developing these indicators. We anticipate a lot more activity following today as well. We'd like to put out a white paper in the coming months summarizing some of the key findings that we have from discussions with you and from the panel today, and then work towards developing some indicators following that. So I just wanted to, in closing, thank our panelists in advance for their input here. I think it's going to be critical that we make this a discussion in the community, and I want to thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Josh. That's a really helpful overview. Professor Beer, can we invite you to make some remarks?
And talk about impact and where we are with our new research excellence framework. So, impact case studies are being used in the United Kingdom research assessment exercise in this year, 2014, for the first time, to give 20% of the 1.6 billion awarded every year as core quality-related research grant. And the quality of those impact case studies is being assessed by peer review. Now, the Higher Education Funding Council for England have made a clear statement all along. Blue Skies research is fine, and we are in favour of it. We just ask that some of your research has had impact. And the UK official definition of REF impact, research that has had an effect on, change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environment or quality of life beyond academia. Remember that? The last qualification is important. It is beyond academia. So the problem that everybody agrees is that impact is important and desirable, but can you measure it and assign a score to it that allows the defendable allocation of large sums of money and indeed rankings? The Funding Council are not convinced that measuring impact will all go well quite yet. And so they've commissioned a large study post-REF to see if it all worked and to collect the data. We are cautioned by the Australian ERA. I think their experience was they decided to do impact, then decided not to do impact, and now you're going to give it another go? Yeah, but Professor Sharma will presumably say more about that. Now, impact in general can be contentious amongst conservative academics, but it is very hard to make a case that public money spent on university research should never have to have impact. Impact occurs at different rates and in very different ways in different academic disciplines, so it is hard to compare across those disciplines. It should be like citations and the H-index, may be meaningful to compare in a single subject, but not necessarily between disciplines. At my university, Oxford Brookes, we are tracking impact, the impact of research, as an ongoing project. We've got a PVC whose specific remit is impact, not just research impact again, but the impact of teaching, of knowledge exchange, and entrepreneurship, etc. One very good effect of the impact agenda in the recent REF is that the UK higher education sector now has at least 6,795 carefully written up stories of research impact that can be used to lobby government and politicians for funding and research support. And we've never had a resource like this before. Now, at Brookes, we've become very keen on impact, and although many of our disciplines are industry-facing, some of the most engaging and exciting case studies have come from the humanities. And this might be helpful in terms of data for rankings, because, of course, the humanities are less secure in terms of citation counts. So the impact case studies could be very helpful to us here. In terms of knowledge transfer, exchange, commercialization, metrics, etc., after a long period in which these were hard to find, I think reliable metrics are becoming available. Some of them have previously had a bad reputation and have been hard to measure. Definitions of knowledge transfer and knowledge exchange are not universal, and there is a lack of agreement about what qualifies under these headings and whether transfer and exchange are different. And it's interesting that all politicians, definitely all politicians in the United Kingdom, were absolutely certain, they knew for sure, that UK basic research was great, but that we failed dismally in commercialization and that we threw away billions. But actually the latest data makes it clear that this is completely wrong. Averaged over all metrics, the UK is consistently in the world's top 5 countries. And just to give you some examples, patent applications were more than 50,000 in 2011, which put us 6th amongst comparator countries. UK startups and spin-outs per unit of research and development expenditure, we were 2nd amongst comparators. Our invention disclosures per unit of research and development expenditure, 1st among comparators, and our patent citation share, 10.9% in 2012, 3rd amongst comparator countries. So, are these good measures? They sound like they're good measures, but to hear the moral panic going on in the UK about our efficacy, you would think that they weren't providing such a positive picture. Most universities care very deeply about their intellectual property rights and work to protect them. Again, it is believed, but hard to check, that higher education institutions as a whole spend far more maintaining patents than they make from them. Now, we have one at Brookes, we have a number, but we have one that makes us about 1.5 million a year and has been doing so for the last 20 years. So, you know, one patent like that is going to make a huge difference, but that is one among many, and it is an isolated success story in terms of how much we make from it. And again, you have to make a decision quite early on which ones you're going to maintain, and that's a problem for universities and indeed for rankers. I'm not using Cockney rhyming slang there, by the way. So different higher education institutions in different regions have different rules about whether they assert rights over their academics' IPR. In the UK, we do own the academics' IPR, but we also operate a generous reward to inventors scheme so that everybody wins in the end. Now, it's already been pointed out that IPR in the UK and everywhere else is dominated by bio and biopharmaceutical companies. So in pharma, UK HEIs filed 25% of patents in the field originating for UK inventors. And by contrast, UK HEIs file only 6% of non-pharma patents. So the field is limited in terms of those metrics to those institutions who have disciplinary expertise in the field of pharmaceuticals. Just to conclude, I'd like to mention that the UK reserves 160 million of public research funding per annum for higher education innovation funding, what we call HIFE. Its official function is to support and develop a broad range of knowledge-based interactions between universities and colleges and the wider world, which result in economic and social benefit to the UK. Now, most institutions use HIFE extremely innovatively, and it is one of the differentiators between us, the way in which we do deploy those funding. So again, it's difficult to measure, but it's an activity that is important and is going to get increasingly important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent overview. For a long time, I thought when I was sidling up to people, they were calling me a ranker. It turns out they were always calling me something quite different. One of the things that's really exciting, I think, about this resource database of these case studies in the UK, the 6,700 case studies, is that I think people are quite confidently predicting it will really help to demonstrate excellence in ways that hasn't been demonstrated before, and it won't be the usual suspects who benefit. There are some universities who aren't traditionally lauded for research excellence will suddenly have a light shone on them, so it's really exciting. I think the real challenge there is it's been a vast exercise of actually writing narratives and case studies which can't be replicated globally, but a fantastic opportunity for the UK to demonstrate this arena. I'm going to hand over to Professor Costa now, without further ado.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this distinguished panel. And as I have a limited time here, I'll try to focus on a few points. Start with what Phil has already mentioned as a simple and crude indicator, which is the industry income from the ranking methodology that is used by Times Higher Education nowadays. It only measures the research income from industry, and that's it's weighted against the number of academic staff, and it's 2.5% of the total ranking. So what I would like to suggest here is that if we really want to identify academic institutions producing social and economic impacts, we should look at other indicators in terms of innovation, for instance, and I would think of patents, but not only patent application, because we all know that not all applications are granted to start with. The quality of application is not measured before they are sent to the agencies. So what I thought was perhaps licensed patents, that we should look at licensed patents that are really being found useful by the industry, and they see some potential in these patents. So, and I think we have already some cumulative data for at least a decade or two for some institutions that could show much better how they are doing in terms of innovation. And even better than that, I thought of licensed income. If we can measure the amount of income that an institution is getting from their license or its license, I think we should get a very good indicator of how innovation is playing to produce social and economic impact. Another aspect in the same area is business incubator initiatives. I think we should definitely look at institutions which are managed to incubate new business starting from their own labs and research groups. And we could look at the volume of incubation initiative and also the rate of success, because we know there are a lot of new companies coming out of these incubating initiatives don't really survive for a long time. So I think the rate of success is also something important to look at. And another point is the startup and spin-off companies that are originated from academic research labs and projects. And looking at an example of my university, we are very proud to see that at least 245 companies have been originated along our history. And they offer nowadays more than 10,000 jobs. Most of the jobs are high-skilled jobs, demanding people that we graduate from our course as well. So it's a snowball effect, as someone mentioned before, and I think that should be also evaluated and measured if possible. In terms of the learning environment, I would think of if we do want to search for new indicators, we could try to identify academic institutions which are fulfilling societal demands and making significant contributions in social inclusion initiatives and affirmative actions. That is actually very important for emerging economies like Brazil, which are still very much marked by educational inequalities, especially in higher education. So if we can try to find some way to pinpoint or to search for institutions which are making a real difference in this area, that should definitely measure the impact into the society. So can we develop indicators that could identify successful initiatives to promote access of disadvantaged students, either socially or ethnic, to higher education? And that's, I think, is quite a challenge. I'm not an expert in metrics, and I think it would require quite a lot of thinking on how to develop some metrics on that, but I'm quite sure it's very important. I'll just mention an example from my university, which is a program called PIES. It's a Unicampus program for social inclusion and affirmative action. We try to benefit students who did their basic education entirely in public school. And the Brazilian system, the public school basic education is usually not as good as the private school basic education, different from the higher education system. So these students are usually from low-income families. And what we do, we give them an extra 60-point bonus in the university very competitive entrance exam. That is equivalent to just below 21% of the maximum number of points. Just to give you an idea of how competitive our entrance exam is, the average rate is 20 applicants for one position. So every year. So we have more than 65,000 applicants for over 3,000 positions at university. In addition to this 6-point bonus, we give students from ethnic minorities who also study in public school an extra 20-point bonus, which is a total of 60 plus 20 in this case. That's 27.8% of the maximum number of points. And that allowed them to be very competitive with the other students who had their basic education from private school. This is the first social inclusion initiative in Brazil which is not based in quotas, just in quotas, and an evaluation of the performance of the students who benefit from this program showed that after a couple of years they perform exactly like the average students from the university. And with some adjustments we made into this program this year, we got 37% of the students that were admitted into Unicamp benefit from this program. So that's a small example of things which I'm sure other universities all over the world are trying to do in the same area, which could be measured, and I think they are really making a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's a really important area to try and address, actually, social inclusion. And it moves me very neatly on to the next speaker. Professor Sahul actually came from the streets himself. He was a kickboxer, and he was rescued from the streets, and he's now running one of Malaysia's biggest universities. So sorry to put you on the spot. He bears the scars of his fighting days, but it's a wonderful example of social inclusion and what your university is doing now. But sorry to embarrass you there.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you for inviting me. I'm from Malaysia, the famous Malaysia now. Everybody knows Malaysia now. The planes are safe, don't worry. And Malaysia is a developing economy. Times Higher uses 13 performance indicators, which is grouped into 5 to 6 areas, where citations, research influence is one of the most important indicator, and also the learning environment. In Malaysia, ranking is taken so seriously to the extent it has become a stress factor to all vice chancellors. It's a very big stress factor, and Phil is definitely the most influential man in Malaysia now. And I think, let's put jokes aside. On the other hand, ranking is good. I think it's high time that some of the vice chancellors get a kick on the butts to wake up. And it creates competition, it creates awareness, it definitely brings into light what other universities are doing and how can we improve. And that's the way any country should go. And one of the KPIs of vice chancellors in Malaysian universities is graduate employability. The students must score 80% graduate employability within 6 months on graduation. Actually, that's a very big task. I think very soon ranking itself will be another criteria. I think that's a time I will call it time to retire. Actually, I do represent a very huge university, 200,000 students. I have a faculty member of 10,000 faculty members, 10,000 support staff, 26 comprehensive faculties, right from medicine onwards. And we also cater, especially as what Phil have said, cater for kids on the street. We actually go out and look out for street kids who have completed schooling, high school, and drag them into the university, and then turn them around and then put them into the system. And we have been doing it since I became the Vice Chancellor, and I think we have salvaged 20,000 of them now. Fully sponsored, supported by alumni. Alumni pumps in a lot of money to do this, and we have been quite successful. 80% have been successful. Otherwise, these kids will be marching on the streets, or they will be spoiled rats, and it will be bad for the economy. So I think this university does that. And Phil said it right, I came from that system. I was a street kid. But this university, which I represent now, took me from the streets and gave me an education. And I think that education is the one that has brought me up to right now. If I could do it, the rest can do it. So these are some of the indicators that it's not reflected in a university like us. And let me go to the most serious factor now, the response on the various indicators. Like for instance, on the citation as an indicator. And I represent a developing economy. I fight for the developing economy. And yes, we have no doubt that to some extent it describes how much each university is contributing to the sum of human knowledge. They tell us whose research has stood out, has been picked up, built up on other scholars, and most importantly, has been shared around global scholarly community to push further the boundaries of our collective understanding, irrespective of discipline. Even the data has been normalized by discipline. I think Joshua just showed the way the data mining was done. But to compare universities from developing countries with those with well-developed economies, or comparing Western to Eastern countries, different cultures, Northern and Southern Hemisphere, establish young university and special mission, traditional brick and mortar universities, still remain biased. Those differences must be addressed. Young university and a special mission university like what I have described, that very much confined to national policy and much dependent on restricted budget, definitely will find it tough to compete with those from well-established universities. Now, on the publication indicators, to have international collaborators, co-authors is also challenging for one young university. But it would be a motivating factor if Times Higher can include any non-ISI, but on a lesser weight, especially if the country has its own indexing mechanism. In Malaysia, we have Malaysiana. For Malaysia, publication should not only be biased to include only in English. Signs of how global an institution is its outlook does not only depend on how many publications are in English. Effort should be looked upon perhaps in coming up with a balanced indicator. Maybe amount of work done in national language and the amount of original work translated to other languages can be also an indicator to show how these universities are emerging. Or on the teaching impact indicator, measuring only ratio of output to input is not enough to indicate the quality of teaching. Teaching quality normally goes deep into character of a graduate. Long after she leaves the university or he leaves the university, what they turn out to be somehow more indicative of a good educational exposure, resilience, adaptability, and maturity. How do you measure that? Hence, number of graduates that become entrepreneurs or become members of professional bodies perhaps should be considered as an extra indicator of good teaching. Nowadays, the universities are not turning graduates to fill up posts in government or the private sector. If you want to turn the economy of a country, they have to become entrepreneurs. My university have changed the tagline. The university uses a new tagline we call, we create employers. We need to create more employers so that these students will be able to employ more. That will bring up the economy, which is not even included in the indicator, but which our university does it. So we try many ways to fit our culture, to fit our nation, to fit our economy. But all these are not indicated. It's not that I say do away with what you have. No. Do consider some of these indicators, which I think will be useful for a developing university. Of course, there are many other factors that we can include in terms of a lot of research has been done, a lot of money has been poured in. There's a lot of product, but none is sold. That is not a good indicator or research paper which is published so much, but there's no product. Even the product is not selling. We have to find out the benefit cost of that research, how much the product has been sold. That is a good indicator. It is just by research funds. Some countries have so much money, they can pump in as much as they can and say, oh, we have done research, we have pumped in so much research papers. But where is the product? That are not indicators. And of course, we have to look at published theses. There are many other things we can consider. Like when we talk about teaching impact, again, the result of professional bodies. That's how the quality is measured. Every faculty, every department has its own professional body. And that professional body governs the quality of that institution or that particular program. Is there an indicator of, like for instance, I give you an example, our engineering. Okay. Our engineering faculties have been accredited by UK Board of Engineers, but it's never been indicated. Okay, just to wrap up, I think I'll stop here. We'll answer more questions.
Thank you. So I want to make sure there's some audience Q&A.
Yeah.
I think there's some really great points in there. Graduate outcomes, I think, are the sort of holy grail. You know, we can look at salaries, we can look at employability. Capturing that consistently is a challenge. We had some experiments with looking at which institutions produced the Fortune 500 CEOs, and we'd love to reflect that on leaders of arts and culture. And there's lots of ways of capturing them, but I think they're too simplistic at the moment. Great to explore that further. But I'm just going to pass straight over to Jared de Graaff, because we want to make sure we have time for some Q&A as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. Glad to be here. I'm not representing any of the universities, neither young nor old. So why am I here? Why am I here to talk about rankings? Because we know that rankings do more to direct universities' attention, policymakers' attention, students' attention than any other policy tool. And as a policymaker, therefore, we are very interested in what rankings can do. In Europe, and you're aware, we are going still through a rather deep economic crisis. We need more growth, we need more employment. We are a low growth, low unemployment continent. That is not our ambition. And for that we need new business models, we need startups, we need dynamism in our economy, we need web entrepreneurs, we need all kind of disruptive innovation. And we know from empirical evidence, and we just published a study on the 30 kind of most impressive polls of excellence in the European Union, that universities are absolutely critical to playing that role at a regional level. We see that in regions where universities are innovative and produce impacts, growth is higher, employment creation is higher. And that obviously for policymakers means we want to see more of that. And it's interesting that you don't see this just, and this is talking about the European Union, in the kind of places where you would expect it. I mean, in the ranking which we put out, or at least the top 30 polls of excellence in the European Union, which we put out 2 weeks ago, I mean, you find places that you would not intuitively associate with kind of high innovative activity, or at least not in the public mind. I mean, you see cities there like Darmstadt, Heidelberg, Eindhoven, Maastricht, you see Surrey there, you see Aalto, Aarhus, Grenoble. I mean, so it's not just about London, Berlin, and other big kind of places in Europe. You see a lot of innovative activity at regional level in the more medium-sized cities. So, and it's the ecosystem that really matters. It is the linkages between the university and the SMEs and the authorities around it that kind of makes kind of, or at least explains a large part of the success. And the universities we know and we see provide the oxygen and the nutrients to the ecosystem. So that's why we're interested in rankings, because rankings help to change behavior. They induce kind of self-criticism, looking at what you can change to do better. They nudge people and organizations in a different direction. Well, what kind of indicators? I mean, if you look at that ecosystem, and we look at the Times Higher Education ranking as it is, does it capture that dynamic? Well, in our view, it doesn't, or it doesn't sufficiently. It's not to say there's not a good ranking, but it is just, I think, a good reason to look at alternative indicators. So what should we be looking at? And if we listened kind of carefully to many of the presentations, we heard that entrepreneurship is important. So is there, for example, a room for entrepreneurship training in education? Are kind of the students prepared to become entrepreneurs and to create their own companies? So what is the share of the time that they are exposed to entrepreneurship training? I very much agree with comments that were made earlier about exposure to humanities, social sciences, because that's not just kind of important to become a rounded personality, but a lot of the challenges actually require knowledge of these other areas. I mean, robotics. I mean, we found out in Europe with genetically modified organisms that you can do a lot of research, but if the public acceptance isn't there, you're never going to be successful. Robotics, nanoelectronics. I mean, all these issues about acceptance and kind of consumer expectations and user expectations are really important. So entrepreneurship, exposure to social and humanities, important. Startup, I think we heard it earlier. It would be very interesting to know how many startups are created, say, per 1,000 students, and then obviously how many startups still exist after a certain time. Incubators, funding, industrial collaboration with kind of industrial partners. How much does that represent for the revenue side for an industry? So those are all issues that I think need to be looked at. Overall, of course, with any ranking, because rankings are liked when you're in the top 50, but when you're not in the top 50, you don't really like the rankings very much. So we have to be sure that there's clear transparency. We are probably looking at things that are much more intangible than the things that you're looking at now, where there's data about patents and citations. And so if you look at intangibles and we rely more on self-declaration, it has to be very transparent so that it can be peer-reviewed and there's no over-declaration. And obviously, any method also needs to be relatively simple to implement. If it becomes too complicated, I mean, you get a discussion about whether it's actually measuring what you want it to measure, and then it becomes too costly also to implement. So the process from here, I think we very much welcome as European Commission the start of this process, because that's what it is, will be as important as the outcome. I think it's important that people have an opportunity to kind of introduce ideas and comment on proposals. So the idea of a white paper is very good. The idea of a consultation is very good, because ownership will be absolutely critical to the acceptance of such a ranking. But from our perspective, obviously, such a ranking would be very welcome, because we see it as an important public policy instrument to drive the kind of change that we will want to see in Europe, and that no doubt other policymakers around the world will want to see in their regions.
Thank you very much. That was really helpful. I think what's very exciting about this process is that with Thomson Reuters, we do have a direct relationship with each institution, so we can ask questions that haven't been asked before. It's not just about mining existing databases, it's about getting institutions to self-report some of this information. Now, that's a huge challenge to get right and get consistent, but it's a brilliant opportunity to engage directly with each institution and ask some basic questions. So it'd be great to develop those sorts of areas we want to get from the institutions. Professor Sharma is a real leader in this agenda for the Australian Technology Network and at University of Queensland Technology. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I'm going to stand because coming from Australia, you tend to be jet lagged at this time of the day. The question of research impact and the broader impact of universities is a very important one in Australia. And we obviously started looking at impact very early on. And the government then lost the election and the policy changed, but we did provide our input to the British government and the Higher Education Funding Council of England, and they took the ideas. We now have a same government which started, it has come back, and we are now looking at influencing the government to bring research impact back. But let me come back to the subject here, the metrics for impact of universities, broader impact for universities. And I'll probably try to focus on a couple of issues here. One is, what can we measure that universities report by surveys? And what are some of the issues around the audit and the quality of that data? And what else can we measure from what is already publicly available, like the Thomson Reuters or other databases that are there, which go somewhat towards getting a better sense of the impact of universities' research and other aspects that is outside the scholarly impact. If we look at the impact of universities' research or the impact of universities' knowledge transfer, you can measure all sorts of things. You can measure inputs, you can measure process, you can measure whether you tick the box, whether you have a technology transfer office or not. I think ultimately it's all about how much money does the university make from the transfer of knowledge that it creates. Now, we have to be extremely careful here. The knowledge that we create has to be looked at in a much broader way than just technology commercialization. So let's look at what are the things that we can look at. Now, first and foremost is, of course, licensing income or sale of equity in startups, that's fairly standard. Everyone says that there is commercialization, but we also know that it is not a lot of money unless you get lucky. It's bumpy, it's not predictable, but we have to include that income because that is there, and most governments collect that data, and it's probably easily verifiable. But the second thing is very important, that much licensing in universities happens when we enter into research contracts with industry, because sometimes we trade intellectual property for research income. That is commercialization. And industry research income is pure commercialization as we know it. If we want to include a better sense of commercialization, includes the social sciences, then we have to look at contract research not just with industry or businesses, but government agencies that contract the research to the university. That is not peer-reviewed, bottom-up driven research. So all end-user driven research is commercialization income so far as I'm concerned. And most governments collect this data, it is verifiable, it is auditable. Next we go to consulting. Now, of course, consulting is commercialization. It's the commercialization of the intellectual property via services. And that's how much of the economy runs. Most advanced economies, 80% of the economy is services. That's how we contribute knowledge. And if we don't capture that, then we are basically capturing a very narrow definition of commercialization. So consulting income should be there. And at least in Australia, we do report on consulting income every 2 years. Which brings me to another sort of component that is missing currently in the thinking about commercialization. What has happened is that many universities now are taking the consulting to a different level. They are becoming providers of customized education and training to the corporate sector and the business world and the end users. If you look at the postgraduate coursework market, as it is called in Australia, or the taught masters in the UK, they are sort of not really growing. They are becoming like, smaller and smaller. Corporate training is becoming very focused. They don't want a 2-year master's degree. They're happy to pay for a 2-week training in something because that's what's needed. And many universities now are becoming big players in customized training to the corporate sector. That is knowledge transfer. And we're beginning to collect data about that, and we are trying to push the Australian government to collect data at the sector level. So if you combine the customized education with consultancies, with industry research income, and with the licensing income, and of course you use price parity purchase, so you don't sort of disadvantage any country that, where the currency is weaker, do it on full-time equivalent academic staff basis, you take account for size, then you get a true measure of outcomes of total commercialization that comes out of the university. And it is not narrow. And of course, if your processes are not right, you will not succeed in this. I had some other things to say, but I'll take it up in questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker, thank you. POSTECH actually not only is the 2013 world #1 ranked university, it also was named as one of only 2 higher education institutions by Thomson Reuters as a World 100 Innovator. So I'm very excited about what Professor Su has to say.
Okay, can I have a screen here? Okay. I'm from POSTECH. Luckily, we've been ranked top in last 2 years in among the young universities who are 50 or younger, and we expect to see the result this year on Wednesday. Okay. I'm chair of a University Evaluation Management Committee, which is taking care of international relations and rankings. Okay. This is is there any? Oh no. What happened? Okay. You sure? This one. This one. Okay. You sure? Okay. And so I'm going to present knowledge transfer for Korean universities and the impact on its university evaluation. Okay. the patents contribution of Korean universities, trend of the number of patents applied, the percentage is increasing, and blue one stands for non-university and red one stands for university. Number of patents are increasing, and also the percentage of university is increasing also. So the implication is that university plays a greater role in patents. And the second one, patents are registered, and also the total number is a little bit ups and downs, but the university portion is increasing. Interestingly, the university, the percentage of patents applied, they are registered. The patents are registered by universities. The percentage is much more than the percentage of patents applied, which means that the university patents application is more acceptable than non-university applications. So that universities, Korean universities, doing very well in being accepted the patents. Okay. And technology transfer, from 2007 to 2011, the contracts number is increasing, and so the technology transfer contract of Korean universities is increasing rapidly, probably compared to 2007 or 2011, about more than doubled. And trend of technology transfer licensing fee of Korean universities amount, the unit is $1,000. Also increasing. 2007, 16,000 or 160 million, right? And then 2011, $47 million. Startups by faculty member. In 2011, four-year university, number of founders, 135, two-year colleges, 41, so totally 176. Number of firms, and 136, and two-year colleges, 38, 174. Number of employees and the total sales in terms of $1 million. And startups by students. And students also four-year university and two-year college, and number of firms and number of employees. So steadily increased in all criteria. University Technology Holdings Company, and by Korean universities, number of University Technology Holdings Company is cumulative number is increasing. Number of university subsidiary companies, and every year a little bit ups and downs, but normally the company is established by university. Korean universities are very strong, so number of cumulative companies is increasing. So implications is trend of knowledge transfer of Korean university, and portion of patents by Korean university is increasing, and technology transfer is also increasing also. Cumulative startups by faculty and students is continuously increasing the market share. So knowledge transfer criteria and university evaluation, university rankings. 중앙 Daily Newspaper. 중앙 Daily Newspaper compiled ranking the last 20 years in most powerful rankings inside Korea. Postech has been number 1 or 2 last 20 years, and was number 1 last year. Launched in 1994 as the pioneer in university ranking publication in Korea, inside Korea. Weights research income per faculty 8%, and number of registered intellectual property per faculty 3.3%, amount of technology and transfer fee per faculty 3.3%. Total is 15%. So in terms of knowledge transfer, 중앙 Daily Newspaper ranking, they takes 50% for technology transfer, and Times Higher Education Thomson Reuters World University Rankings, this is the 13 criteria. Among them, I think 6% research income and also research income from industry. So total is 6 plus 2.5, 8.5%. So this is, as you understand that the knowledge transfer by university and patents and startup companies is increasing. So university contribution to knowledge transfer and so the intellectual property also increasing. So I think in terms of rankings, that must be that the weight is raised. So conclusion, weight of knowledge transfer can be increased for evaluating university qualities in making university rankings. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think one of the reasons why the weight for our knowledge transfer indicator is so low at the moment is about the problems and challenges of creating and collecting consistent data, and the fact that data we have is relatively simplistic. So as we develop more sophisticated metrics, we'd certainly be looking to expand that area. But my chairing has gone awry. We haven't got an awful lot of time. We will continue these conversations electronically and through the breaks and the drinks, but if we can open up to questions, that would be fantastic. We have two down here. If we can take two at the same time, if that's okay.
Hi. I'm David Greene from the University of Worcester in England. Phil, I'd like to thank you and the panel for dealing with social inclusion and innovation as well as economic. And I just want to ask how you're going to try to develop measures which give a quantitative indication rather than recognition, which I think is much easier and is qualitative. And if I can just give an example from my own institution, where we've done two things which are very innovative. We've created a university and public library, and we've also created a sports hall, which is the first purpose designed to include those with, who are disabled and need to use a wheelchair to play sport. And if I quote in terms of recognition, our Minister for Universities at the recent Universities UK conference, the University of Worcester has broken new ground in really bringing its community onto its campus. Its inspirational new library, The Hive, is the first joint university and public library in the country. It's a fabulous resource for students and researchers, but it's also pulling in people, and especially disadvantaged young people, from outside in a quite remarkable way. Nearly 4 times as many children are now taking out books to read. Kids who'd never set foot in a university go there voluntarily to do their homework after school. And I could do something similar with the University of Worcester sports arena, where in the first year 150,000 children have come to pay a visit, which is 400 a day, and to participate. The thing is, it's easy to recognize these things, but how are you going to measure comparably when nobody else has done it? Because that's the nature of innovation. When it's a social innovation, that you're first, and then probably there'll be other people who'll do it better. So I think it's a really big methodological challenge, and as an economist who loves to measure things and know we always get it wrong, I want to wish you good luck.
Thank you. And there was a, can you get the mic to the front? Oh, you've got one, sorry.
Thank you. Ricardo Romo, University of Texas, San Antonio. A very interesting discussion. I think there are two challenges. One is how in fact do we grow up and mature and do the patents and do commercializations and do the licensing and so forth. But the second challenge is that there are countries represented here in which you have very little diversity. So you really don't have an African American population, an Hispanic population, an Asian population. And I think that the challenges are very different when you start a school, as we did, in that is now that is now interested in first-generation students. It's interested in individuals that have never gone to college. I'm Hispanic American, Mexican American. 35 years ago when I was at UCLA, there were only 2% of my group got a PhD. Today, it's 3%. So we've made very little progress in educating certain groups of people in our society. It's a lot easier, I think, to be in Costa Rica, as an example, where you educate all the Costa Ricans, and there are almost no blacks, almost no Indians, and you say to yourself, you pat yourself on the back, we educated everybody. But in my community, 70% of our students are low income. And 70% are first generation go to school. And so the challenges are very different when you start saying, well, how are you doing? If I'm in Costa Rica and I'm educating more people this year than last year, pat myself on the back. But in societies where you have a lot of inequities, and I congratulate the work being done in Brazil, where you guys are one of the few to be saying, you know, there's a large Indian population that has to be educated. It's not just the, you know, there's a large black population that has to be educated. So you have a lot of challenges, and I can identify with that. So I congratulate you. I'm learning a lot, and some of it I can take back, and some of it I'm just kind of wondering how I apply it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And there's a question from Julian, and then we'll go to the panel.
I'm Julian Beer, and I'm Pro-Vice Chancellor at Plymouth University. Mine's a very open question, and it's very evident there's a lot of energy and a lot of passion in the room today, and there's a lot of momentum being created from this first summit. So for me, it's how do we continue that momentum, and how do we create a legacy from this event today, focusing on both the indicators but the other things that we've discussed. And I'd like to give some thought to that from the panel, please.
Thanks very much. Does anyone like to tackle any of those? I think the legacy area is a really interesting one. I think Aaron and the ATN have been discussing that, and I think so of you, Jared. Do you want to make any remarks about how we can keep the momentum going and actually try and turn some of these talks into feasible indicators?
Yeah, I think we have to take this debate, and we have to also focus on what we want to achieve. I think many of you may have read Malcolm Gladwell's article in New Yorker on the ranking. The moment you try to achieve too much, the quality of the ranking evaluation exercise is dismal. I think we have to, there are two things we are talking about here. We are talking about business engagement, commercialization, readiness with the economy, and then we are talking about social inclusion. They're both extremely important things to measure. And I think we probably need two different rankings for those things, because trying to have a combined ranking that takes social inclusion does justice to social inclusion, and it sort of like, you know, doesn't try to answer what we are trying to do. And I think we first have to address that. Then in both these cases, we actually have to see what is the data that is publicly available that we can address, then what is the data that we can attract by surveys, and if there is some audit and cleaning mechanism that we can do. Similarly, it's going to be a bit easier in the business engagement and licensing and commercialization, but I think still there is a challenge there. And once we have done that, then we have to do a pilot. And with the pilot, we actually have to see what is the burden on universities in undertaking this exercise, because at the end of the day, it can become an exercise in serious resourcing in the universities. But we have to, like, you know, we have to do these measurements, because if we do not measure these things, we're not going to change the culture in our universities. And I think those two things are extremely important.
Well, I fully agree. There's, I mean, what you just said. I think it's important that we set out the goal very clearly. When you start with this white paper process, it isn't just a process that we go round and round and round. I think it has to be very clear that this is a process with a view to achieving a result by a certain time. A year, I don't know what would be realistic, and then to organize in the process in a way which would allow those who will be affected and are interested in this to provide input. I mean, this is a very good start, but what I could envisage is that you organize a number of workshops, maybe one in Latin America, one in the US, one in Europe, one in Asia, so that people can come and provide ideas, and that these ideas can be assessed and processed. But I mean, if you kind of don't set out very clearly the results at the end of the process, people will not commit to the process. So I think there needs to be a decision that actually we think this is important. We realize it's difficult, it's complicated, and at the same time we have to keep it simple, because otherwise it doesn't work. If we want to measure too many things, we end up with measuring nothing really well, or it's going to be not understood. But that we are going to go forward because we absolutely believe this needs to be measured, and we want to see change, and we recognize that rankings are a very good way to drive change in our universities and in our society. So I think that's where we have to take the jump. And then we have to be confident in ourselves that we will find a methodology that ultimately maybe not going to be agreed by 100%, but we'll have enough support to get going through a pilot, and then you can improve it over time.
Thank you. Janet, did you want to make a comment?
That's okay.
Well, that's handy, because we're really running out of time quite badly. I'm very sorry I've overstretched this one, which is typical because there's so much to talk about, but we will keep the conversations going. Did you want to make any remarks on the issue around access and social inclusion?
Just a quick remark. I think it's a tremendous challenge for a top-ranked university to engage itself in social inclusion and affirmative actions, whereas at the same time maintaining its high standard. But that's necessary in certain societies, especially in emerging economies. And I don't really know how to develop the metrics for that, but I think the idea here is to start a discussion that will hopefully follow along and try to get some useful indicators for that.
Thank you. And in terms of David's point, I think there is a massive challenge around this incredibly rich, wonderful, qualitative information that's just simply impossible to gather on a global basis. But I think the models provided by the UK's RAF are going to be fascinating for the rest of the world to follow, and the data there will be wonderful. We might see that being replicated. We're hearing more about that in Australia. So it may be an approach that we can eventually draw some really good comparative information from. But I'm sorry we've run out of time. Let's keep this conversation going. There'll be lots of electronic communications, and the white paper from Thomson Reuters will of course be shared with you all when it comes out. We'll be writing about it in the magazine, and no doubt continuing to talk about it over drinks this evening, where passions will probably run high because it's one of those subjects that everyone has a strong opinion on. So thank you so much to the panel. It's been actually fantastic, and I'd like to congratulate them one more time for a fantastic contribution.